Hello and welcome to another GCSE History revision video. This one focuses on paper 3 and looks at Nazi policy towards workers, including how unemployment was reduced and whether the workers were better off under Nazi rule. The first key point to note is that the Nazis made dealing with unemployment and controlling workers a priority from the moment they came to power in Germany. Let's think about why. Firstly, the Nazis came to power at the height of the Depression. It felt like the fabric of society was breaking down under the pressure of unemployment, poverty, hunger, and rising crime. This concerned all social classes. One of the central promises which the Nazis made during the election campaigns of the early 1930s was that they would fix the economic problems and solve unemployment. In order to keep the support of the population, they needed to deliver on this. Although the Nazis had won some votes from workers, the workers were not natural Nazi supporters. Indeed, many of the workers supported the Nazis' ideological enemies, the communists. The Nazis now needed to control these workers and secure their support by getting them back into work and improving their living standards. Prioritising workers also fed into the Nazis' most important goal: national recovery. This meant restoring Germany to its position as a great power in the world by building up Germany's economic strength and conquering an empire in Eastern Europe. To do this, the Nazis wanted to create a national community of racially pure Germans with shared values working towards Nazi goals. This meant that all Germans needed to be engaged in productive work. Those who were unemployed were seen as a burden to the economy and a threat to the values of the national community, which prized unity, hard work, and self-sacrifice. Finally, the Nazis were aware of the power which workers could exercise through their trade unions. Workers organised in unions could exert political power by carrying out strikes. The Nazis were very concerned of the potential for workers to disrupt their economic plans, so workers had to be brought under control. The second key point to note is that the Nazis appeared to have great success in dealing with unemployment. They reduced it from around 4.8 million to just 0.3 million in 6 years, which was an astonishing achievement. So how did the Nazis reduce unemployment? Here are the 4 main strategies they used. Let's add a little detail to each of them. Firstly, the Nazis set up public works schemes. These were huge building projects, mostly related to transport and infrastructure, including autobahns, which means motorways, railways and bridges. These schemes created thousands of jobs, and they also made transport and trade easier in Germany, which boosted the profits of other industries, creating jobs in other sectors too. The other thing to note is that these infrastructure improvements had a military purpose as well. They made it easier to mobilise the army quickly in the event of war, which was one of the Nazis' most important long-term goals. Secondly, the Nazis broke the terms of the Treaty of Versailles by beginning rearmament from the mid-1930s. The treaty had set strict limits on the German armed forces, which the Nazis ignored by conscripting men into the army and beginning a massive programme of producing armaments, aircraft and other equipment for the military. This production was funded by the government and created a demand for coal, steel, chemicals and textiles, so those industries grew quickly too. Thirdly, the Nazis set up the Labour Service, or RAD. It was compulsory for all young men to do 6 months paid work in the RAD, usually on work which helped to improve infrastructure and the landscape, such as fixing roads and draining marshes. Once again, all this was funded by huge government spending. All this looked like the Nazis had achieved an economic miracle, getting millions of unemployed men back into work. However, some historians have challenged this by pointing out that the Nazis also hid the true number of unemployed. We call this invisible unemployment. Some groups, like Jews, housewives and part-time workers, were removed from the unemployment register. They simply weren't counted as unemployed, even though they were not in work. Furthermore, we might also point out that many of the jobs which the Nazis created were artificial because they wouldn't have existed in normal times. This includes jobs within the party, like the SA and the SS, and all the jobs which were funded by government spending. Such spending was so high it could not continue forever, so these jobs were not permanent. As well as reducing unemployment, the Nazis also tried to control workers. Let's look at some of the ways in which they did this. Firstly, they set up the DAF, or German Labour Front. The DAF was a massive organisation led by the Nazi Dr. Robert Ley. It replaced trade unions, and all employers and employees had to join. In theory, the DAF was meant to protect workers' conditions and settle disputes between workers and their employers. It was also the DAF which organised the huge public work schemes which we mentioned earlier. Let's think about the impact which the DAF had on workers. Firstly, the positives. The DAF organised public work schemes which created hundreds of thousands of jobs for the unemployed. This meant that they could now work to earn a wage and feed their families, and that gave them back their self-respect and dignity. The DAF also protected wages by setting the minimum pay for jobs. Wages began to rise slowly until 1936, and after that wages rose much quicker. Now this was especially the case for skilled workers, for example, engineers and technicians who worked in the new aircraft factories. They could earn perks and bonuses, which meant that they could afford luxuries. The DAF also gave workers some security in their jobs. It prevented employers simply firing workers without notice. On the other hand, pay was not universally good for all workers. Public work schemes often involved incredibly hard labour for very limited wages, while unskilled workers in factories found they earned considerably less than their skilled colleagues. Any wage rises they did get were swallowed up by the increasing cost of food and other items, so they weren't really much better off. And even when pay increased, this came at a cost. The DAF increased working hours to 72 per week, so workers had to work longer to get their pay. Meanwhile, workers found that their rights in the workplace were reduced by the DAF. Strikes were banned and workers were stopped from negotiating better pay with their employers. In practice, the DAF almost always took the employer's side in workplace disputes, and workers who were absent or who slowed production were punished. Another method of control was the RAD, or Labour Service. This was the compulsory labour service which all young men had to do for a period of 6 months. During this time, they had to leave their families and lodge at RAD camps, where, in addition to labour, they were made to wear uniforms and carry out military drill and parades. These camps served as a way of the Nazis indoctrinating young men with Nazi ideology and values, including hard work, self-sacrifice, teamwork, and self-discipline. Such values were part of their preparation for military service later. The big positive here was that the RAD did get men into work, creating thousands of jobs. By 1935, over 400,000 young men were doing labour service. This gave them the opportunity to earn a regular wage. However, the work itself was tough, usually involving heavy physical labour. The rigid timetable for life in the RAD camps and the other activities like drill and parades were unpopular with the men who were forced to do them. The work which they did received very little pay, less than the unemployment benefits they had received before. And the conditions in RAD camps were also unpleasant, with men subject to tough discipline and a poor diet. Life for these men was physically and mentally exhausting. The next method of control was the KDF, or Strength Through Joy. This was a programme set up by the DAF. It offered a range of affordable leisure activities for workers to participate in. The aim was to organise workers' leisure time, keeping them busy and contented, thus preventing opposition to the Nazis. Most KDF activities reinforced Nazi values too, and encouraged people of all social classes to come together in communal pursuits. This was important to the Nazis, who wanted to overcome social divisions and create a unified national community. Workers gained some real benefits from the KDF programme. Many thousands of workers took part in the activities which were offered. Here you can see how many people participated in some of the activities in just one year, 1938. In some cases, this was the first time that workers in Germany had ever had these sorts of opportunities. For example, over 10 million went on package holidays, including cruises, travelling as far as Norway and the Canary Islands. Such activities must have made life enjoyable for those who participated. However, not all KDF schemes delivered benefits. One of the schemes was an affordable car designed by Porsche called the Volkswagen Beetle. Through the KDF, workers were given the chance to save 5 marks per week for a car of their own. The money went towards factories to build the cars, but with war approaching in 1938, the factories switched to weapons production, so no cars were delivered and workers were given no refund for the money they lost. Furthermore, although activities could be enjoyable, workers were also subjected to indoctrination while they participated in them. For example, a huge new cruise ship named after Robert Ley was built to carry over 1,500 passengers. However, while it only had 40 toilets and 100 showers, it had over 150 loudspeakers through which passengers were subjected to Nazi propaganda while they travelled. Finally, let's look at the SDA, or Beauty of Labour. Again, this was another programme set up by the German Labour Front. Its role was to pressure employers to improve conditions for industrial workers in their factories. The SDA provided some money to fund these improvements. There were some genuine improvements to workers' lives here. By 1938, 900 million marks had been invested in making improvements to around 30,000 companies. These resulted in material improvements to workers' conditions, including better lighting, ventilation, and reductions to noise levels. Some workplaces built better facilities for their employees, including canteens, toilets, and showers. However, the picture is not entirely positive. These improvements came at the cost of extra labour. Workers were forced to build and decorate the new facilities themselves. This extra work had to be done outside hours, and workers received no extra pay for doing it. Before we finish, here's a diagram showing the main policies which the Nazis took towards workers. Try pausing the video and doing one of these revision tasks. Either talk through the different policies, explain to yourself out loud what each policy was, what the Nazis did and why, and what the results were. The other option is to make a copy of the diagram and add detail under each of the headings from memory. Then watch the video again, adding in any points which you forgot about or missed out. If you're keen to follow up on this topic further, here's an interpretation question which you could have a go at, based on two different historians' views about the impact of Nazi policies on workers. And if you would like to take this further still, here are two explain questions which you could have a go at using your notes from the video. Thanks for watching. If the tutorial was helpful, don't forget to like the video. You could help out a friend by sharing the link to the video with them. There are videos covering the rest of the Germany content on our YouTube channel, as well as Paper 3 exam technique. And remember, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already become one of our followers.